It was already past 7 p.m. when Julia Monroe parked her rusty sedan in front of a modest house in the outskirts of Portland. Rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the view of the worn-down wooden fence and the porch light that flickered like it was on its last breath. She took a deep one, tightening her grip on the steering wheel. Another interview. Another desperate attempt to keep her life from crumbling. She had $20 in her wallet, rent 3 days overdue, and a mother in the hospital who needed medication by morning. If she didn't land this job, she didn't know what she'd do next. She climbed out into the cold, pulled her coat tighter around her body, and knocked twice on the door. What she didn't know was that behind that peeling door wasn't just a simple nanny position. It was the beginning of something that would break her, remake her, and change the course of her entire life. The door creaked open. A boy of about 6 stood there, barefoot, clutching a stuffed bear. His brown curls were a mess, his eyes guarded but curious. "Mom," he called out behind him. "The lady's here." Moments later, a woman appeared at the end of the hall, tall, effortlessly elegant even in jeans and a plain hoodie, her hair tied in a messy bun. Her presence filled the room with a quiet authority that struck Julia instantly. "Hi," the woman said, her voice soft but firm. "I'm Claire." Julia extended her hand, trying to seem professional. "Julia Monroe. I'm here for the nanny job." Claire didn't shake her hand. She just looked at her, long and direct, like she was trying to see beneath Julia's skin. After a long pause, she said, "Come in." The warmth of the house was a welcome contrast to the storm outside, but Julia couldn't ignore the feeling that something was off. The furniture looked secondhand, the walls had cracks, and yet everything was too intentionally humble.
Clean. Neat.
Not a speck out of place. Claire gestured for her to sit on the couch. "This is my son, Liam," she said, watching her son closely. Julia smiled at him, trying to make a connection. "Hi, Liam. I like your bear." Hey, if you're enjoying this story, go ahead and drop a like to help us grow even more. And let me know in the comments, on a scale from 0 to 10, what score would you give this story so far? Your feedback makes all the difference. The boy didn't answer, but something in his expression softened. Claire, however, remained unreadable. "Why do you want this job?" she asked. No pleasantries. No small talk. Julia swallowed. "Because I need it. I love kids. And I'm good with them. I worked with children before, but I had to leave to take care of my mom. She's ill." Claire's gaze didn't waver. "What about your own kids?" "I don't have any," Julia answered, her voice more defensive than she intended. Claire nodded slowly. "You'll live in the rooms upstairs. If Liam likes you, you stay. If he doesn't, you're out by the end of the week." It wasn't a job offer. It was a test. Julia nodded anyway. All right. Later that night, Julia stood alone in the tiny room upstairs, looking out at the rain-soaked yard. Everything about Claire bothered her. How guarded she was, how cold yet intoxicatingly magnetic her presence felt. It was ridiculous, but something deep in Julia's gut whispered, "She's hiding something." What she didn't expect was that Claire, at that very same moment, stood in her own room downstairs, watching Julia on a small monitor. A nanny cam. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable. Liam had liked her. That much was clear. But Claire didn't care about that. Not really. She was watching Julia because she needed to know one thing. Could this woman be trusted not just with her son, but with the truth? Because Claire Westwood wasn't poor. Not even close. She was the CEO of a luxury real estate empire worth over $200 million. And the house Julia now lived in? It was one of her old investment properties, stripped down and deliberately made to look humble. Claire had been burned too many times. Everyone wanted something from her. Money, connections, power. But now, she had only one goal. Find someone who would love her son not for what he could offer, but for who he was. What Claire hadn't expected, though, was the way her own chest had tightened when she looked into Julia's eyes. The way the woman's voice lingered in her head even now. The plan was to test the nanny, to test her intentions. But as she watched Julia fall asleep on that narrow bed, Claire felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Intrigue. And worse, desire. She turned off the monitor, walked to the window, lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. She hadn't expected her to walk through that door. And she sure as hell hadn't expected to feel anything. Claire exhaled slowly into the glass and muttered to herself, "You're playing with fire, Westwood." But deep down, she already knew. The fire had started the moment Julia walked into the house. And there would be no turning back. The next morning, Julia woke to the sound of birds and the scent of coffee drifting faintly through the air. For a second, her brain forgot where she was. Then the memory of the previous night rushed back. The storm, the interview, the house that didn't feel quite real. She rubbed the sleep from her eyes and pulled her tangled hair into a loose bun before making her way downstairs. Claire stood in the kitchen, barefoot, pouring orange juice into 2 glasses. Her movements were precise, deliberate, elegant in a way that didn't match the peeling linoleum floors or the scratched countertops. Julia hovered by the doorway, unsure if she was supposed to speak first. Claire didn't even glance up. "There's toast," she said flatly. "He likes it with strawberry jam." "Who does?"
Liam.
"He's picky with breakfast. Won't eat if you don't slice the toast diagonally." It was an order masked as information. Julia stepped forward silently and began to prepare the plate. She wasn't going to let this woman intimidate her, even if her voice made her knees go soft. Liam appeared minutes later, dragging his stuffed bear behind him and blinking up at Julia with cautious eyes. She smiled and knelt down. "Good morning, Liam. I made toast the way your mom said you like it." The boy hesitated, then took the plate and sat at the table. No words, but no resistance either. Claire watched all of it in silence, her eyes dark and unreadable. Julia couldn't tell if she was being judged or studied. Maybe both. "Do I pass the first test?" Julia asked with a soft smirk, trying to lighten the air. Claire's lips twitched. "You're not here for me. You're here for him." But her eyes lingered a second too long. Julia felt it, a flicker, almost imperceptible. The day passed slowly, with Liam cautiously opening up in small ways. He didn't talk much, but he began to follow Julia around, mimicking her movements, handing her toys wordlessly, even holding her hand when they walked to the backyard. Claire watched it all from the shadows, keeping her distance. Every laugh from her son tugged at something raw inside her, something old and painful, the part of her that still hadn't forgiven herself for marrying the wrong person, for bringing Liam into a world full of false smiles and greed. She hadn't just lost millions in her divorce. She'd lost her ability to trust anyone, especially women who smiled too easily. But Julia wasn't like the others. She wasn't polished or poised. She had chipped nails, a coffee stain on her jeans, and a fire behind her eyes that Claire couldn't stop looking at. She didn't flirt, didn't try to impress. She just was. And that unsettled Claire more than she'd admit. That night, Julia sat alone on the porch steps, the air crisp and quiet, Liam asleep upstairs. She hugged her knees to her chest, staring up at the sky. She felt strange, like she'd stepped into someone else's life and wasn't sure how to play her part. Then the screen door creaked open.
Claire.
Barefoot again, a glass of wine in one hand. She sat beside her without a word. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Claire said softly, "He laughed with you today." Julia looked over, surprised by the softness in her voice. "He's a sweet kid. He just needs someone who sees him." "And do you?" Claire asked, eyes locked on hers. "See him?" Julia didn't flinch. "I do." Claire took a sip of wine, her jaw tightening slightly. "Most women who apply for this job ask about salary first. You didn't." "I didn't care," Julia replied, voice quieter now. "I needed more than money." "What did you need?" Claire's question hung in the air like a challenge. Julia hesitated, unsure why her throat felt so tight. "A purpose. A chance. Something real." Claire's gaze didn't move. Real is hard to find. There was a weight behind those words. A history. Julia could feel it. She was tempted to ask more. "Who hurt you? What broke you?" But instead, she just said, "I'm not here to lie." Claire turned away. Everyone says that, until they get a glimpse of the truth. Julia frowned. What truth? But Claire didn't answer. She stood, walked back inside, and left Julia with a storm churning in her chest. That night, Claire lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The plan was simple: test the nanny, protect Liam, keep her heart locked away. But already the lines were blurring. Julia was nothing like she'd expected. She was messy, real, infuriatingly honest. And Claire couldn't remember the last time someone looked at her and didn't see dollar signs. She closed her eyes, fighting the pull. She couldn't afford to feel anything. Not again. But in the silence of the house, with Julia's scent still lingering faintly in the hallway, Claire finally whispered into the dark, this was a mistake. And yet, she knew she wouldn't ask Julia to leave.
Not yet.
Not ever. The rain had stopped by morning, but the house felt heavier than before. Claire sat alone in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of black coffee she hadn't touched. The silence was thick, interrupted only by the distant sound of Julia's soft humming upstairs as she got Liam ready for the day. Claire closed her eyes for a second. She needed to regain control. This wasn't part of the plan. Julia had only been there for 2 days, and already Claire was thinking about her voice, her smile, the way she crouched down to Liam's level and made him feel like he mattered. It was infuriating, dangerous, and far too tempting. Upstairs, Julia was helping Liam tie his shoes. "You did it better than yesterday," she smiled, brushing a curl from his forehead. He looked up at her, finally speaking more than a few words. "You're not like the other ones." Julia paused, heart squeezing. "What do you mean?" "They were pretty, but fake." He said it like it was the most normal observation in the world. Mom didn't smile at them. Julia blinked, caught off guard. "And does she smile at me?" Liam shrugged. "She looks at you more. When you're not looking." Julia's heart skipped. She couldn't explain it, but from the beginning, something in her had pulled toward Claire like gravity. She was difficult and closed off, yes, but there was also something soft buried beneath the armor, something fragile that made Julia want to reach for it even when it pushed her away. Downstairs, Claire stood at the bottom of the staircase, having heard the entire exchange. She hated that her walls were so thin. Hated even more how hearing her son say those words made her chest ache in ways she hadn't allowed in years. She didn't want Julia to see her. Not fully. Not when she wasn't even sure who she was outside the empire she had built and the lies she now lived in. When Julia finally descended with Liam, Claire was already pretending to scroll her phone. "We'll be out for most of the day," she said casually. "You'll have the house to yourself." Julia frowned slightly. "Is there something you need me to do while you're gone?" Claire didn't look up. "Just don't go in the basement. There's mold. Dangerous." It was a lie, but a necessary one. The basement held files, documents, clues to who Claire really was, and it wasn't time for that part of the truth. Julia nodded slowly, curiosity already rising in her chest. After they left, the house felt too quiet, too staged. Every drawer was perfectly organized, every photo frame dustless, and yet not a single personal item in sight. No baby pictures. No old toys. No clutter. Nothing that felt like a life had actually been lived there. Julia's instincts tingled. Something didn't add up. Hours passed, and she found herself pacing. She didn't want to snoop, but part of her felt like she was living inside a story that didn't make sense, like reading a book with pages torn out. She walked to the basement door, hesitating. Claire had told her not to, but something inside her whispered, "Just look. Just once." She opened the door slowly. The stairs creaked beneath her feet. The light flickered as she reached the bottom. There were boxes, dozens of them, labeled with numbers and vague descriptions. She knelt, opened one, and her breath caught. Magazines, articles, news clippings, all about Claire Westwood. Billionaire.
CEO.
Divorce scandal. Julia's fingers trembled as she flipped through them. She stared at a glossy photo of Claire on the cover of Forbes, dressed in a tailored suit, chin high, eyes cold. Nothing like the woman upstairs who wore old hoodies and pretended to be scraping by. It was a lie. All of it. Julia backed away, her mind spinning. Why would someone like Claire pretend to live like this? Why hide her wealth? Was this all just a twisted experiment? She felt betrayed, manipulated, but underneath the confusion, there was something else.
Fear.
Because if Claire was lying about this, what else was she hiding? And yet, despite everything, Julia couldn't shake the memory of their moment on the porch. The way Claire had looked at her like she was the only person who'd ever dared to see beyond the surface. When Claire returned later that evening, Liam ran to his room and Julia stood in the hallway, arms crossed. "We need to talk," she said, voice low, restrained. Claire's eyes narrowed. "About what?" "About you," Julia snapped. "Or whoever you're pretending to be." Claire didn't flinch, didn't panic. She simply sighed, ran a hand through her hair, and said, "You went in the basement. You lied to me." Julia shot back. "You lied about everything." Claire's expression shifted, something tight in her jaw, something vulnerable that flickered just for a second. "It wasn't a lie," she said finally. "It was a test." "A test?" Julia repeated, incredulous. "Are you serious?"
Yes.
"And you failed." Claire turned away, walking toward the kitchen. "You went looking. That tells me everything I need to know." "No," Julia said, following her. "You don't get to flip this on me. You set this up.
You manipulated me.
Your son. Everyone." Claire's voice turned sharp. "I did what I had to do. You think I don't know what people do when they see money? You think I haven't watched them pretend to love my son just to get close to me?" Julia stared at her. "And what about me? You think I'm like them?" Claire's silence was answer enough. Julia's eyes burned. "I trusted you. I cared about your son. And maybe I started to care about you too. But clearly that was my mistake." She turned to leave, but Claire's voice stopped her. "Don't walk away." Julia froze.
Why?
"So you can watch me some more? Test me again?" Claire stepped closer, and for the first time, her mask cracked. "Because I haven't stopped thinking about you since the second you walked through that door." Julia's breath caught. Claire was inches away now, her eyes dark, stormy, desperate. "I didn't plan this. You weren't supposed to matter." "But I do," Julia whispered. Claire didn't deny it, didn't move, just looked at her like she was breaking apart inside. And Julia? She had no idea whether she wanted to kiss her or slap her. All she knew was that something irreversible had just happened between them, and it was far too late to undo it. Julia didn't sleep. Her body lay still in the narrow bed, but her mind was a wildfire. Claire's words kept echoing in her head. You weren't supposed to matter. It should have made her angry. It should have sealed her decision to pack her things and leave that house before dawn. But it didn't. Because the way Claire had looked at her when she said it, like every wall she'd ever built was crumbling all at once, had ignited something far more dangerous than rage. Understanding. And worse, longing. Claire Westwood was a liar, yes. But not the kind Julia expected. She wasn't hiding her money because she was ashamed of it. She was hiding herself because somewhere deep down, she was still broken, still bleeding. And Julia knew what that felt like. Morning came too fast. Julia moved through the kitchen on autopilot, preparing breakfast before Liam even stirred. She didn't see Claire until the boy was already seated at the table. Claire entered quietly, wearing a loose gray sweater that slipped slightly off one shoulder, hair pulled back in a messy knot. She didn't look like a billionaire today. She looked tired, human. For the first time, Julia didn't look away. She held Claire's eyes with a steadiness that made the air in the room shift. I'm not leaving, she said calmly. Claire blinked, clearly surprised. You're not?
No.
Not until we talk properly. Not in half-truths. Not in tests. Just talk. Like two people who are both exhausted and have too many secrets. Claire hesitated, then nodded, barely. Liam was the buffer for most of the morning. Julia kept him entertained with finger painting and makeshift blanket forts in the living room, while Claire lingered nearby, her eyes softening every time she caught Julia laughing with her son. There was something intimate in the way Julia moved through the house, like she belonged there. Claire hated how much she liked it. It wasn't until Liam took a nap that the tension returned in full force. Julia sat on the armrest of the couch, arms crossed. Claire stood by the window, the late morning sun cutting across her face. "So," Julia said. "What now?" Claire didn't turn around. "You found out who I am, that I'm rich, that this whole house is a performance."
Yes.
"And I want to know why." Claire turned slowly. "Because money ruined everything. My marriage, my friendships, my reputation. Every woman I ever dated only saw my bank account. No one saw me. Not really. Not even after Liam was born. I thought maybe if I stripped it all away, someone would show up for him. For him. Not for the life I could give them." Julia's voice dropped. "And did you ever think that maybe someone could show up for you, too?" Claire's eyes flickered. "I didn't want that. I wasn't looking for it. Then why are we standing here like this?" Julia asked, voice trembling slightly. Claire stepped forward slowly. "Because I can't stop thinking about you. I tried. I told myself you were just another test. Another name on a list. But every time you laugh with Liam, or roll your eyes at me like you're not afraid, or challenge every word I say, it gets harder to pretend I don't feel something." Julia's heart pounded. "You feel something?" "God help me, I do," Claire whispered. "And it terrifies me." They were close now. Too close. Julia could feel the heat of her breath, the way her eyes searched her face, like she was trying to memorize it. Julia had no idea when she reached up, but suddenly her fingers were grazing Claire's jaw, light and hesitant. "You don't get to pull me in and push me away," she murmured. "Not with something real between us." Claire's lips parted, like she wanted to speak, to confess something else, but she didn't. She just stood there, breathing her in. For a second, Julia thought she would lean in, that the space between them would finally collapse. But then, Liam's cry from upstairs broke the moment like glass shattering. Claire pulled away, backing up 2 steps, walls rising again like a reflex. "I should check on him," she said quickly, voice clipped. And then she was gone. Julia stood frozen, her hand still hovering in midair, her skin still tingling from where they had almost touched. The rest of the day was quiet. Claire avoided her. Julia didn't push. But that night, after Liam was asleep and the house was silent again, Julia found herself standing at Claire's bedroom door. She knocked once. No answer. Then, slowly, the door opened. Claire stood there, not surprised. Like she'd been waiting. Neither spoke. Julia stepped inside. The room smelled like clean linen and rain. Claire stood by the window, staring out. "You shouldn't be here," she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. Julia walked toward her. "Then tell me to leave." Claire didn't. She turned slowly, and their eyes met again, this time, full of everything they hadn't said. And when Julia reached out this time, Claire didn't move away. She let herself be touched. Let herself feel. Their foreheads pressed together. Breath mingling. No words. Just heat and silence, and the unbearable closeness of 2 people who had been denying themselves far too long. Claire's hand moved to Julia's waist, tentative, trembling. Julia's fingers tangled in Claire's sweater, pulling her just enough to feel the tension snap. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But the weight of the moment was louder than any kiss could be. Julia pulled back just slightly. "When you're ready to stop hiding," she whispered, "I'll still be here." Then she turned and walked out of the room, heart pounding, body on fire, leaving Claire breathless and shaken in the dark. Claire leaned back against the wall, her chest heaving, her hands trembling. She had tried so hard to keep her world under control. But Julia was chaos in its most beautiful form. And Claire didn't know how much longer she could resist letting the chaos in. Claire hadn't moved in over an hour. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of the wood as it settled in the night. but inside her chest, everything was loud. Her pulse,
Her breath.
her guilt, her longing. Julia had left her standing in the middle of the room with her heart in her hands, not demanding anything, not accusing her, just offering something real. Something terrifying. And Claire didn't know what to do with it. Because everything in her life had been built on control, on armor, on distance. And Julia had stripped that away with nothing more than a whisper and a touch. Claire wanted to run. But more than that, she wanted to follow her. The next day began with quiet tension that neither woman dared to name. Claire kept her distance, sticking to her office, pretending to work. Julia spent most of the morning with Liam, but she felt Claire's presence like static in the walls, like gravity shifting every time they were near each other. At lunch, they crossed paths in the hallway. Just a second. Just one look. But it was enough to make Julia's stomach twist and Claire's fingers clench against the doorframe. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. That afternoon, Claire's phone rang while she was in the kitchen. She answered out of habit, expecting a telemarketer or maybe one of her contractors. Instead, a familiar voice oozed through the receiver.
Claire.
You've been very quiet lately. Her ex-wife, Miranda, poison disguised as silk. Claire's entire body tensed. What do you want? She asked, voice cold. Miranda laughed softly. I just wanted to remind you about our agreement. I stay quiet, you stay out of the press. But then I heard a little rumor, something about you living like a peasant in the suburbs with a new companion. Claire's blood went ice cold. You've been watching me? Of course I have, Miranda purred. You think you can disappear and play single mom in a fairy tale while I sit back and watch you get adored? Not a chance. You left me with nothing but lawyers and humiliation. You owe me. Claire's grip on the phone tightened. If you touch my son... Relax, Miranda interrupted. I'm not a monster. I just want you to remember who you are. And who I am. Because if I don't get what I want soon, well, I'm sure the tabloids would love to know where the queen of real estate has been hiding. Claire ended the call with a trembling hand. Her chest was tight. The past was closing in again, slithering under the floorboards, poisoning every breath. She poured a glass of water and stared out the window. And then suddenly Julia was there. Not speaking. Just watching her. Claire turned slowly. How much did you hear? Enough, Julia said softly. She threatened you. Claire looked away. She's just trying to rattle me. She always does. And is it working? Julia asked, stepping closer. Claire didn't answer. Her silence was louder than any confession. Julia stopped a few feet away, crossing her arms. You keep saying you want someone to love your son for who he is, not what you have. But what about you? Do you even believe you deserve love anymore? Claire's head snapped toward her. Don't. Why not? Julia pushed. Because it's easier to pretend you're untouchable? Because if no one gets in, no one can hurt you. Claire's voice cracked when she finally spoke. Because every time I let someone in, they break something. Julia took a slow breath. I'm not her. And I'm not here for your money. I'm here because I see how Liam looks at you. Because I see how hard you try. Because despite everything, I think you might be the loneliest woman I've ever met and the bravest. Claire blinked, and a tear she didn't permit slipped out. She turned away quickly, but Julia stepped closer. Look at me, she whispered. Claire didn't move. So Julia reached for her hand. And for the first time, Claire let someone hold it. They stood like that in the kitchen, two women suspended in a moment that neither had planned for. The air between them vibrated with tension, fear, desire, hope. Claire finally turned, just enough to meet Julia's eyes. If I let you in, if I fall, I don't know who I'll be on the other side. Julia stepped in even closer, their foreheads nearly touching. Then let's find out together. And then finally, Claire kissed her. It wasn't delicate. It wasn't hesitant. It was months of loneliness crashing into a single act of surrender. Claire's hands cupped Julia's face like she didn't know whether to worship her or cling to her for balance. Julia kissed her back with equal fire, her fingers digging into Claire's waist, pulling her closer, grounding her. The kiss deepened, breath tangled, bodies pressed. The kitchen faded. The world shrank. There was only this, the taste of trust, of vulnerability offered and accepted. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Claire touched her forehead to Julia's. "You terrify me," she whispered. Julia smiled. "Good. That means it's real." Claire exhaled a shaky laugh, and for the first time in years, it wasn't bitter. But upstairs, a soft sound made them freeze. Footsteps.
Liam.
Claire straightened, pulling herself together fast. Julia stepped back, lips still tingling. Their moment, for now, was over. Claire turned toward the stairs just as Liam appeared, holding his bear, his eyes sleepy. "I had a bad dream," he said softly. Claire walked to him, crouching. "It's okay, baby. I'm here." Julia watched them from the hallway, heart swelling in a way she hadn't expected. Not just because of the kiss, but because this was what she'd been missing for so long. Something real. Something worth fighting for. But as she turned to go back to her room, her phone buzzed with an anonymous message. Just a single line. "You should ask Claire what really happened in her divorce." Julia's heart dropped. Because love was never simple. And the past was never done. Julia couldn't sleep. Not after the kiss. Not after the message. Her fingers still trembled with the memory of Claire's lips on hers, the press of their bodies, the heat that surged between them like something unstoppable. But that text, it was like a hand gripping her chest, pulling her back into the cold. She stared at her phone screen in the dark for what felt like hours, rereading those words over and over again. You should ask Claire what really happened in her divorce. The message had no sender, no number, no trace. Just a whisper of poison meant to unravel everything that had just been built between them. Julia didn't want to believe it. She didn't. But she also couldn't ignore it. Claire had been guarded from the start, and while she had finally opened up, at least a little, there were still entire parts of her life locked away, wrapped in silence. Morning came too quickly. Claire was in the kitchen again, making pancakes with Liam, laughing softly at something he'd said. It was strange, seeing her like that, like nothing had happened the night before. Like she hadn't kissed Julia with the kind of desperation that echoed all night in her bones. Julia stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them. Claire looked up and smiled, warm and real. And that made it worse. Later, when Liam went to play with his building blocks, Julia followed Claire into the laundry room. Claire was folding sheets, casual, humming under her breath. "We need to talk," Julia said, trying to keep her voice even. Claire didn't look up. "I was hoping you'd say that." Julia stepped closer. "I got a message last night. An anonymous one. It said I should ask you what really happened in your divorce." Claire froze. The fabric in her hands slipped to the floor. For a full 5 seconds, she didn't move. Then she slowly straightened, her back to Julia. "I was wondering how long it would take." "So it's true." Claire turned around, arms crossed now, her face guarded. "What part?" "I don't know," Julia snapped. "Because you've told me nothing about it." Claire's jaw tightened. "Because it's mine." "And you think keeping it locked away will protect you? Or me?" "It's not about protection," Claire said sharply. "It's about survival." Julia exhaled, stepping back. "Claire, if we're going to be anything real, I can't be in the dark like this." "I won't." Claire closed her eyes. The silence stretched between them, painful and thick. Then finally she spoke. "Miranda and I met when I was 24. She was a corporate lawyer, smart, charming, polished. I thought she was everything I wanted, someone who could keep up, someone who understood the pressure of my world. We got married fast. Too fast. She helped me build the company, but everything came with conditions. Love was conditional. Affection was conditional. Even her interest in Liam, when he was born, depended on whether he fit into her life, her plans." Julia listened, breath held. She cheated. Repeatedly. But every time I confronted her, she flipped it. Said I was the problem. That I was emotionally distant. That I was too obsessed with control. And maybe she was right, I was cold. I was closed off. But only because every time I opened up, she weaponized it. Claire's voice cracked. And then, when I finally filed for divorce, she threatened to go public. Said she'd paint me as unfit. Said I was manipulative. That I used Liam as a pawn. So I paid her off. A lot. I gave her money, silence, everything she asked for, just to keep my son out of it. Julia stepped closer, gently this time. Claire, I'm so sorry. Claire looked at her, eyes raw. I don't tell people that story, because it makes me look like a woman who let herself be destroyed by love. And I hate that. I hate that I still flinch every time someone gets too close. Julia swallowed the lump in her throat. You didn't let her destroy you. You survived her. Claire shook her head. And now you know. If that changes anything for you, I understand. Julia didn't hesitate. She reached for Claire's hand and held it tight. It doesn't, but I need to ask you something else. Claire nodded, cautiously. Was I part of another test? After the kiss, was that real? Claire didn't speak immediately, but then she stepped forward and touched Julia's cheek, her thumb brushing the skin like she was afraid she'd disappear. It was the most real thing I've felt in years. Julia closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. The weight in her chest eased, not completely, but enough. Claire leaned in then, pressing her forehead against Julia's. Stay, she whispered, even if I'm still a mess. Julia nodded. I'm not going anywhere. They didn't kiss this time. They didn't need to. The connection between them was already stronger than words, deeper than touch. But the world outside their little house wasn't done with them yet. Because later that night, Claire's security system sent her a silent alert. A private investigator had been spotted on the edge of the property. Watching. Waiting. Claire stared at the screen, her heart thundering. Miranda was done being subtle, and she was coming for them. Claire didn't sleep that night. The silent alert from the security system kept flashing in her mind. The timestamp burned behind her eyes. 11:43 p.m. Someone had been standing just outside the tree line behind the property. Not moving. Just watching. Miranda. It had to be. Claire had seen her do it before. Sending investigators to trail her, leak subtle rumors. Always careful never to do anything technically illegal, just enough to rattle the cage. Claire paced the bedroom like a ghost, fists clenched, trying to decide whether to wake Julia or pretend she could handle it alone. But she already knew the answer. She couldn't handle this alone anymore. Not when Julia had kissed her like she was worth more than every dollar Claire had ever made. By morning, she was downstairs early, coffee untouched, staring blankly at her laptop. When Julia entered the room, Claire didn't even notice until a hand gently touched her shoulder. You didn't sleep, Julia said, her voice low. Claire didn't lie. There was someone outside the property last night. Julia's eyes widened. What? Did you call the police?
No.
They didn't step onto the land. It was someone watching, waiting. And I know who sent them. Claire turned her laptop toward Julia. An open file. Photos. Surveillance stills. Miranda, stepping out of a black SUV last month. Her perfectly composed face. Her perfect lies. She's escalating, Claire whispered. She's never shown up this close before. And if she's here, she's not just watching me. She's watching you. Watching Liam. Julia sat slowly, heart pounding. What does she want? Claire looked down.
Me.
In control. Silent. Alone. Julia's hand reached across the table, lacing their fingers. Then you're not giving her what she wants. Not this time. Claire closed her eyes.
She'll use Liam if she has to.
And you'll protect him, Julia said firmly. We'll protect him.
But you have to stop running.
You can't hide anymore. Not from her. Not from yourself. Claire looked up and something shifted in her eyes. Resolve. Then we do it together. Later that day, Claire called her legal team. Quietly.
Discreetly.
She didn't tell them everything, not yet, but she told them enough. If Miranda tries anything, she said, I want her met with fire. Julia watched the transformation with awe. The softness that lived in Claire around Liam hadn't vanished. It had simply made room for steel. For the woman she used to be. The CEO. The fighter. The protector. Claire Westwood was coming back. But Miranda wasn't sitting still either. 3 days passed in uneasy peace. Julia and Claire fell into a rhythm, working together during the day, sharing glances that lingered too long, brushing hands when no one was watching. At night, their connection deepened. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally, in whispers, in stolen laughter, in quiet moments when they both forgot to be afraid. Liam began asking Julia to read him bedtime stories. He hugged her without hesitation. He started calling her Jules, and Claire noticed the way it made Julia melt every time. But on the 4th morning, everything cracked. A sleek black car pulled into the driveway. Uninvited. Claire saw it from the kitchen window and went rigid. Julia was helping Liam with breakfast, but froze when she saw Claire's expression. Who is it? Her. Before Julia could react, the doorbell rang. Claire moved like a machine, each step heavy, inevitable. She opened the door. And there she was. Miranda. Still beautiful. Still venom in silk. Dressed in an ivory coat, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. Claire, she said with mock sweetness. You look domestic. Claire didn't flinch. What do you want? Miranda stepped inside like she owned the air. To see my son, of course. Don't I have that right? Julia stepped into the hallway at that moment, placing herself between Liam and the scene unfolding. Claire moved instantly, blocking Miranda's line of sight. You gave up that right the day you walked away from him. Miranda's lips curled. You mean the day you paid me to disappear? Funny how that works. Claire's voice was steel. Leave. Not yet, Miranda said, stepping closer. Because I see you've replaced me. Rather quickly, I might add. The nanny? Really? Does she even know what kind of monster you were during our marriage? Julia's eyes blazed, but Claire held up a hand to stop her. Get out, she said again. Before I have you removed. Miranda tilted her head. Don't be so dramatic. I'm just here to remind you that you're vulnerable. That your little fantasy world won't last. You think hiding in a shack with a babysitter is love? You think this ends in peace? I made you, Claire. I own you. And if you push me again, I'll remind the world exactly who you are. Claire's jaw clenched, but she didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she stepped aside. Then go remind them. But while you're at it, remind them why you settled. Remind them that you took the money and ran. Remind them who walked out on a child because you couldn't handle being second to someone more important than you. Miranda's smile faltered. Just a fraction. Enough. She turned toward the door, cold fury in her every step. This isn't over, she hissed. When the car finally disappeared, Claire closed the door and leaned against it, breath shaky. Julia came forward immediately, wrapping her arms around her, holding her there, grounding her. I'm sorry, Claire whispered. You don't have to be, Julia replied. Not anymore. But neither of them noticed the envelope Miranda had left on the front porch. Inside, a photo of Julia. And a full dossier. Her debts. Her past. Her mother's hospital records. Everything. And a note written in sharp red ink. Does she love your son? Or just need the money? Claire found the envelope an hour after Miranda left. It was tucked neatly beside the welcome mat, positioned just enough in the open to look like an accident. But Claire knew better. She knew Miranda's games. Nothing Miranda did was accidental. With cold fingers, she knelt and picked it up, her pulse already racing. She didn't need to open it to know it would be a blade. She felt it, sharp, deliberate, personal. She carried it into the living room like it was ticking, sat down on the edge of the couch, and carefully opened the seal. What she saw made her chest cave in. Julia's face, printed in glossy black and white. Her full name, past addresses, employment history, outstanding debts, medical expenses from her mother's treatments. Even a photo of Julia speaking with a nurse outside a hospital, her face tight with exhaustion. The final page was handwritten in Miranda's slanted, perfect script. She says she loves your son. But how much is that love worth? Would she still be here if she knew who you were? Or better yet, if she had nothing left to gain? Claire sat perfectly still for a long time. Her hands didn't shake. Her face didn't twitch. But something inside her was cracking. She had fought so hard to keep Liam safe, to keep her own heart guarded, to find someone who wouldn't see her as a bank account. And now this violation, was telling her she'd been wrong all over again. That Julia was just like everyone else. But Claire didn't believe it. Not at first. Then doubt crept in. She hadn't asked Julia much about her life before. She hadn't wanted to scare her away. She'd assumed the kindness, the warmth, the connection, it had all been real. But now every smile, every touch, every look came under a different light. Was Julia just in need? Was this all about security? Upstairs, Julia was folding Liam's laundry when she heard the front door slam. Hard. She rushed down to find Claire pacing, the envelope open on the table. Claire's back was rigid.
Cold.
Claire? Julia asked, voice cautious. What's going on? Claire turned around slowly. Her eyes were unreadable. Did you think I wouldn't find out? She said quietly. Julia's stomach dropped. Find out what? Claire picked up the file and let it fall open. That your mother's hospital bills are piling up. That you're behind on rent. That your credit's a mess. That you're drowning, Julia. And somehow, you never thought to mention that to the woman who just happens to be a millionaire. Julia froze, breath knocked out of her. You went digging through my life? I didn't, Claire said. She did. She pointed at the note. Miranda left this. Julia's eyes widened as she realized the truth. You read it, and you believed her. I don't know what to believe right now, Claire snapped. I want to believe you're not like the others. But you didn't tell me any of this. You kept it hidden. Because it's not your responsibility, Julia said, voice rising. Because I didn't want pity. I didn't want your money. I came here for a job, Claire. I stayed because of Liam. I kissed you because of you. Claire looked away, jaw tight. Julia stepped forward. You think I planned this? That I faked everything to get access to your bank account? That I used your son, like some kind of ticket? I don't know, Claire whispered. That's the problem. The silence between them turned to ice. Julia's voice broke. You know, for someone who wants to be seen so badly, you really don't give anyone the chance. Claire flinched. Julia shook her head. I loved your son before I even knew your last name. Before I knew you were rich. And I didn't tell you about my mom or the debts because I didn't want that to be what defined me. But maybe you need someone to be a threat. Maybe you don't know how to love without fear. She turned to leave. Claire's voice came soft. Julia. But Julia didn't stop. You know where to find me, she said without turning back. If you ever decide to believe in something other than your trauma. She left the house, walked down the driveway, out into the wind, her heart shattering with every step. Inside, Claire collapsed onto the couch, covering her face with both hands. She didn't cry. She couldn't. All she felt was the dull, numbing weight of loss. The sound of a door closing that had taken her years to open. Upstairs, Liam came to the top of the stairs holding his bear. Where's Jules? He asked softly. Claire couldn't answer. The next day passed in gray silence. Claire barely spoke. Liam asked for Julia 4 times, then stopped asking. The house felt empty again. Hollow. Claire sat in her office late at night, staring at the open file. Staring at Julia's name. Her photo. Her strength. And she finally realized something. Julia hadn't asked for help. She hadn't used Liam. She had done the one thing Claire never expected from anyone. She had stayed even when she had nothing to gain. And Claire had let her go. The next morning, Claire got in her car and drove. No assistant. No driver. No excuses. She drove across the city to the last address Julia had given on her nanny application. A crumbling apartment complex near the hospital. She knocked on the door. It was opened by an older woman in a wheelchair.
Thin. Pale.
But her eyes were kind. You must be Claire, she said gently.
Claire blinked.
She told you about me? The woman smiled. She talks about you every night. She thinks you hate her. Claire swallowed hard. She's wrong. The woman nodded once. She's at the hospital. Volunteer shift. Go.
Claire did.
She found Julia in the hallway outside her mother's room, talking to a nurse. She looked tired, smaller somehow. But when she turned and saw Claire standing there, something behind her eyes lit up, before she quickly buried it again. What are you doing here? Julia asked, voice careful. Claire stepped forward. To apologize. For everything. For not trusting you. For letting her poison my mind again. For not being brave enough to love you out loud. Julia didn't speak. Claire continued. You were never the test, Julia. I was. And I failed. A long beat passed. Julia looked down, then back at her. Then I guess you get another chance. And this time, when Claire reached for her hand, Julia didn't let go. The ride back to the house was silent, but not heavy. Claire's fingers rested lightly on Julia's knee the entire time, her grip soft, grounding, like she was silently promising. I'm here now. I'm not running again. Julia didn't speak either. She didn't need to. Her eyes said enough. There was still pain there, but underneath it, something more powerful, belief. Not just in Claire, but in what they were building. When they pulled into the driveway, Liam was already at the window. The second he saw Julia, his face lit up like the sun had finally come back. He bolted to the door, flung it open, and ran straight into her arms. You left, he said quietly, wrapping his arms around her neck. Julia held him tight, eyes stinging. I didn't want to. I missed you. Mom missed you too, he added. She cried when she thought I was sleeping. Julia looked up at Claire over his shoulder, and Claire, standing at the doorframe, didn't look away. She didn't hide. Not anymore. That night, everything changed. Claire made dinner. Real dinner. No takeout. No rushed pasta. She wore an apron over her cashmere sweater and danced to old jazz while Julia chopped vegetables beside her. It felt absurdly domestic and also perfect. Liam helped set the table. They ate together, laughed, talked. And when Liam finally fell asleep on the couch watching a movie, Claire carried him upstairs, tucked him in, and kissed his forehead like nothing in the world mattered more. When she came back down, Julia was waiting in the kitchen, barefoot, leaning against the counter. Their eyes met. No more hesitation. Claire walked straight to her. Julia reached for her. And this time, there was no storm outside. No interruptions. The kiss was slow. Deep. Familiar now, but still electrifying. Claire's hands cupped Julia's face, her thumbs brushing her cheeks like she still couldn't believe she was real. Julia's fingers slid under the hem of Claire's sweater, her palms resting against warm skin, feeling her breathe. When Claire pressed her body against hers, everything else melted away. The past, the fear, the lies. It didn't matter. Not in that kitchen. Not with the woman who'd stopped running. Claire broke the kiss just enough to whisper, "Come with me." Julia didn't ask where. She just followed. Upstairs, Claire's bedroom was dim, the only light coming from the window. Claire turned, suddenly unsure. But Julia reached out, taking her hands, and said, "Don't be afraid of being wanted." That was all it took. Their bodies met like a sigh and a gasp all at once. Clothes slipped away in quiet urgency. Skin found skin. Hands learned each other with reverence and hunger. Claire's breath hitched when Julia kissed down her collarbone, like every touch was stitching something broken back together. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The way Claire trembled beneath her, the way Julia whispered her name like a promise against her skin, the way they moved in sync, it was enough. Later, tangled in soft sheets, Claire lay with her head on Julia's chest, listening to her heartbeat. "I don't want this to be a secret anymore," she said softly. "Then don't," Julia replied. Claire looked up. "I want the world to know that I love you, that you're not the help, that you're not a project, that you're the woman I choose." Julia smiled, running her fingers through Claire's hair. "So choose me. Every day." "I will," Claire whispered. "I swear." The next morning, Claire didn't go to her fake office. She didn't hide in the guest house. Instead, she logged into her company's servers from her real laptop and scheduled a press release. One that would officially mark her return to the business world after months of retreat. Her assistant, confused but obedient, made the arrangements. Claire wrote the statement herself. Short, powerful. Claire Westwood returns to Westwood Properties after an extended personal leave. She has no further comments, except to say, I finally remembered what matters. The story made headlines within an hour. And with it, Claire's world and Julia's shifted again. That night, while Julia bathed Liam upstairs, Claire sat alone in the living room, phone buzzing nonstop. Messages from former friends, board members, journalists, her lawyer, and Miranda. Claire stared at the message Miranda had just sent. One line. So you've made your choice. Let's see if she survives it. Before Claire could respond, her phone rang. It wasn't Miranda. It was her lawyer. Claire, he said without preamble. We've got a problem. Claire's pulse spiked. What now? Miranda filed a motion with the court. She's demanding shared custody of Liam, and she's claiming emotional instability. That your recent disappearance was part of a breakdown. Claire stood up so fast the chair nearly tipped over. She doesn't care about Liam. This is revenge. I know, but we have to prepare. If this goes public, she'll do everything she can to drag you and anyone close to you through the mud. Claire ended the call and stood in the center of the room, hands trembling. Julia came down a minute later, towel draped over her shoulder, hair damp, smiling, until she saw Claire's face. What happened? She asked, instantly alert. Claire looked at her, the fear rising again, raw and real. She's trying to take him. She's using the courts. Using you. She'll try to make it seem like I'm unstable. That I left the company for a breakdown. That you seduced me into this fake life. Julia didn't flinch. Then we fight. Claire's eyes filled. What if I lose? Julia stepped forward, grabbed her hand. Then you fight harder. And this time, you don't do it alone. Claire's breath shook. I don't know how to let people fight for me. You just did, Julia whispered. Let me in. All the way. And Claire did. But they both knew the next battle wouldn't be emotional. It would be legal.
Public.
Ruthless. And Miranda wasn't done. Not even close. The courthouse smelled like old wood and nerves. Claire sat stiffly on the bench, dressed in a navy blue suit tailored to perfection, her posture straight, her jaw tight, every movement calculated. But her hands betrayed her. They trembled softly on her lap, fingers curled in and out of fists. She had been in boardrooms with billion-dollar contracts on the table and hadn't blinked. But now, with her son's future at stake, she could barely breathe. Julia sat beside her. Not in the shadows. Not hidden. In plain view. Wearing a soft cream blouse, her hair pulled back, eyes locked forward like a shield made of quiet strength. She had insisted on coming, even after Claire begged her not to. If I'm part of the story, then I'll be part of the fight, she had said. And Claire had let her, because deep down she needed her. The room was already buzzing when Miranda entered. All silk and venom, as always, dressed in sharp white like a twisted angel, her expression calm and polished. She offered Claire a tight smile. Nice of you to bring the nanny to court. Bold move.
Claire didn't respond. She didn't have to.
She'd learned by now. Miranda fed off reaction. Attention.
Power.
And today she would get none. The judge entered, and silence fell. The proceedings began. Miranda's lawyer went first, painting Claire as an unstable mother who had abandoned her empire, faked poverty, and entered an inappropriate relationship with an employee while caring for a child. Every sentence was a dagger. Julia watched the narrative unravel, twisting everything beautiful between her and Claire into something dirty, manipulative. She removed her son from a stable environment, the lawyer said. She disappeared from the public eye, relinquishing responsibility to a woman with no verified credentials. And now, She lives with this employee in a romantic relationship that has never been disclosed to authorities. Is this the environment best suited for a child? Claire's lawyer rose to respond, but Claire touched his arm. Let me speak. The judge nodded. Claire stood slowly. Her voice was clear, measured. I built my company from the ground up. I worked 90-hour weeks. I was praised for it. But when I realized my son was beginning to see nannies more than me, when I realized he didn't smile anymore, I was told to delegate, to be efficient. When I left my company temporarily to focus on my child's emotional health, I was called unstable. When I fell in love with someone who actually loves him, not his name, not his inheritance, I was told I was reckless. All because I made a choice every father in a suit gets applauded for. I chose my child. The courtroom was silent. Even Miranda shifted. Claire turned to Julia. She didn't seduce me. I chased her. I tested her. I doubted her. And through it all, she showed up. Not for money. Not for comfort. But for my son. And for me. If that's a crime, then I'll take the sentence. The judge paused, scribbled a few notes, and recessed for deliberation. Outside the courtroom, Claire leaned against the wall, head bowed. Julia stood beside her. You are perfect, she whispered. Even if we lose, Claire murmured. I'm done hiding. An hour later, the judge returned. There is no substantial evidence to suggest emotional unfitness. The court denies Miranda Caldwell's petition for shared custody. Liam Westwood remains under the full care of his mother. Claire didn't exhale until the gavel hit the block. Julia's hand was already gripping hers. Miranda stood, face blank, but her eyes were acid. She walked over slowly, like a serpent who had just missed her strike. Enjoy your little romance while it lasts, she said under her breath. Eventually, everyone leaves you. Claire didn't flinch, but Julia did. She stepped forward, voice low and fierce. I'm not everyone. Miranda's mouth twitched, but she turned and walked out without another word. Later that night, back at the house, Claire walked into Liam's room and sat on the edge of his bed. He was already half asleep, Bear tucked under his arm. You're staying, right? He murmured, eyes closed. Claire brushed a hand through his curls. I'll always stay. What about Jules? He asked. Claire smiled. She's staying too. Downstairs, Julia waited on the porch, barefoot under the stars.
When Claire came out, she didn't speak.
She just walked straight into Julia's arms, buried her face in her neck, and held her like a woman who had finally stopped falling. They sat down together on the porch swing, wrapped in silence and each other. I'm yours, Claire whispered. Whatever you want. However you want me. Julia turned to her, eyes shining. Then let me want all of you. Not just the strong parts. The scared parts too. Claire nodded, pressing their foreheads together. Then you're getting everything. And for the first time in years, Claire Westwood felt free. But inside, on the kitchen counter, Claire's phone lit up again. Another message. Anonymous. Court may be over, but the press is just getting started. It started with one headline. Subtle, almost respectful. Real estate titan Claire Westwood resurfaces after private hiatus, with mystery woman by her side. There was no photo, just speculation. Then came another, sharper. Nanny turned girlfriend? Inside Claire Westwood's secret romance. And then the avalanche hit. Photos of Julia leaving the courthouse. Blurry shots of them on the porch. Anonymous sources quoting insiders about Claire's so-called breakdown and concerning attachment to her employee. The media didn't just pry, it sank its claws into every corner of their lives. Within 72 hours, Claire's name was trending online. Not for her empire, not for her victory in court, but for her love life. She stood in the kitchen on the third morning, phone face down, eyes on nothing. Julia had just finished making pancakes with Liam and was trying, unsuccessfully, to act like everything was normal. Claire hadn't spoken much since the headlines exploded, and Julia understood why. But silence had a weight, and it was starting to crush them both. Talk to me, Julia finally said, stepping into Claire's space. Claire looked at her, eyes tired but sharp. About what? That the world thinks you're sleeping your way into a fortune? That I've lost control of the narrative again? That everything I tried to protect is being turned into a punchline? Julia didn't move back.
No.
About you. About what you're feeling. Because you're not alone in this, Claire. Stop acting like you are. Claire closed her eyes for a second. I've survived hostile takeovers, media smear campaigns, betrayals by people I trusted for years. But this? She opened her eyes, voice cracking. This is the first time someone I love is in the crossfire because of me. Julia stepped forward and took her face in her hands. Then stop trying to shield me like I'm made of glass. I knew what I was walking into. And I don't care what they say. As long as Liam is okay. As long as you're okay. Claire's hands came up, grasping Julia's wrists, her voice a whisper. I don't want you to regret this. Then don't give me a reason to, Julia said softly, and kissed her. That day, Claire's PR team called non-stop. We need a statement, her assistant begged. People are demanding answers. The board wants to know what's going on. Claire rubbed her temples. What's going on is none of their business. Then make it their business, the assistant said. Control the narrative before Miranda does. Claire sat down that night in her home office and wrote a letter. Not a press release. Not a carefully vetted PR stunt. Just a letter. Honest. Sharp.
Brave.
My name is Claire Westwood. I am the founder and CEO of Westwood Properties. I am also a mother. And yes, I am in a relationship with the woman who once cared for my son. This is not a scandal. This is not a secret. This is the best decision I've made in my life. Julia Monroe is not my employee. She is my partner. She is the person who saw me when I forgot how to be seen. She is the reason my son laughs again. If the world has a problem with that, I suggest they find something more useful to do than judge women for loving each other. She posted it to her verified profile with no warning. Within minutes, it exploded. Thousands of likes, comments, support,
Hate.
everything. Julia saw it appear on her feed and felt her breath catch. She ran into the office and found Claire standing by the window, arms crossed, jaw tight. You really did it, Julia whispered. Claire turned to her. I told you. No more hiding. That night, Liam couldn't sleep. Julia lay with him on the bed, telling him stories until his eyes finally fluttered closed. She stayed a while, brushing his hair back, holding the space that had once felt temporary but now pulsed with permanence. When she returned to the bedroom, Claire was in bed already, sheets pulled up to her chest, eyes searching Julia's face. Do you regret any of this? She asked quietly. Julia climbed in beside her, slid under the covers, and pulled Claire close. I regret not finding you sooner. Claire exhaled into her skin, eyes closing. They're going to keep coming for us. The press. Miranda. All of them. Then let them come, Julia murmured. I'm not afraid of being seen anymore. But just as they began to find calm again, reality cracked open once more. The next morning, Claire opened her front door to find a man standing there, mid-50s, polished, wearing a smug smile and a badge clipped to his coat. Ms. Westwood, he said, extending a file. You're being served. Claire blinked, heart thudding. What is this? Preliminary investigation. Allegations of misconduct. Exploitation. Workplace boundaries. She stared at him, then at the document. Inside, Miranda's fingerprints again. A new strategy. A new war. She was trying to destroy Claire's company from the inside, to paint her relationship with Julia not just as scandalous, but criminal. Claire closed the door without a word, locking it behind her. Julia stood in the hallway. What was that? Claire looked up, fire beginning to rise in her chest. She's going after the company now. Julia's breath caught. What do we do? Claire looked her in the eyes. No more fear. Only fury. We end this. On our terms. The world didn't fall apart in a scream. It unraveled in whispers, in emails marked urgent, in voicemails from board members who once praised Claire's brilliance and now questioned her judgment. The investigation Miranda had triggered spread like a toxin, an official inquiry into workplace ethics, blurred boundaries, favoritism. Words that didn't just threaten Claire's company. They threatened her credibility, her legacy, and worst of all, her ability to shield Julia and Liam from the storm. Claire spent hours in her home office, phone glued to her ear, voice clipped, collected, strategic, but beneath the surface, she was burning. Julia knew it. She felt it in every shift of Claire's shoulders, every sleepless night. But Claire wouldn't talk, wouldn't fall apart, not where anyone could see. So Julia waited, watched, and quietly gathered her strength. Because if Claire was going to face this fire, she wouldn't do it alone.
Not this time.
3 nights after the legal summons arrived, Julia found Claire sitting on the floor of Liam's room. The boy was asleep, sprawled across his sheets, clutching his bear like a lifeline. Claire was motionless, back against the wall, eyes fixed on the shadows. Julia crouched beside her. "Talk to me," she said softly. Claire didn't move. "I spent years building something that could withstand anything. And now she's using us to tear it down. Every message I sent you, every paycheck, every whisper between us, she's twisting it into something ugly." Julia touched her hand. "Let her twist. We know the truth." Claire looked at her, something raw in her voice. "What if I lose the company?" "Then you start again," Julia whispered. "And this time, you won't be alone when you do." Claire exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for years. And then, for the first time in days, she let herself fall. Into Julia's arms. Into her chest. Into the one person who had never asked her for anything but her truth. The next morning, they began fighting back. Claire's lawyers filed a formal countersuit, exposing Miranda's repeated harassment, surveillance, and manipulation. Julia provided her own written statement, detailing how Claire had been hesitant, almost too professional, in the beginning. How she had been the one to initiate emotional closeness. How their connection had grown slowly, truthfully, without manipulation or leverage. But the media didn't care about slow truths. They cared about blood. And Miranda knew exactly how to feed them. 2 days later, a leaked video hit the press. Security footage, grainy, angled just right, showing Claire and Julia in the kitchen. The night of the kiss. Their first. The clip cut just before contact, but it was clear enough. The headline screamed, "Was this the moment Claire crossed the line with her nanny?" The footage didn't show emotion. Didn't show context. Just tension. Intimacy. Implied power. Claire smashed a glass when she saw it. Julia didn't flinch. "Let them watch," she said. "Let them see what real looks like. Let them choke on it." But Claire knew the damage was done. The clip was viral within hours. Every talk show.
Every blog.
Every late-night joke. Julia was no longer a mystery. She was a target. Claire called an emergency meeting with her board. In person. She wore black. Sharp heels. No apologies. She stood before the men and women she had once mentored, hired, led. And she told them everything. Not about the kiss. About the truth. "I stepped away from this company to protect my son. I found someone who reminded me of who I was before the titles and the pressure. She didn't manipulate me.
She challenged me.
She made me better. If you believe love disqualifies leadership, then vote me out. But if you believe in rebuilding, in evolution, then stand with me." The vote was close. But in the end, Claire remained CEO by 1 vote. When she got home that night, she collapsed into Julia's arms, laughing and crying all at once. "We're still standing," she whispered. "We're winning." Julia cupped her face. "We've already won." Because she couldn't break us. But then Claire's phone rang. A private number. She answered, and Miranda's voice oozed through like oil. "Congratulations on the vote. But you might want to check your front page tomorrow. You know what they say, if you want to burn a queen, don't go for the crown. Go for the child." Claire froze. What did you do? But the call was already dead. The next morning, the front page hit every newsstand. Claire Westwood's son. The real victim? The article blurred Liam's face, but described everything else in graphic detail. His age, his school, the custody battle, Julia's alleged influence. It was legal, but morally vile. Claire stood in the kitchen, paper in hand, jaw clenched so tight she could barely speak. Julia read the headline over her shoulder and went pale. She's using him now. To shame you. To bait me. Claire turned, fire in her eyes. She can come after me. She can tear me apart in the press. But she doesn't touch him. Julia touched her chest, heartbeat steady. Then let's finish this. Publicly. Let the world see her for what she is. Claire looked at her. At the woman who had walked into her life as a stranger. Who had fought through every wall. And who now stood beside her, not just as a partner, but as the only person fierce enough to protect her family.
Claire took her hand.
Then we end this. Together. In the open. They had survived betrayal, the press, the courts. But this final blow, the one aimed at their heart, would take everything they had left. And they were ready. The studio lights were blinding. Claire adjusted her earpiece while a production assistant dabbed powder across her cheekbones, muttering something about shine and angles. She wasn't listening. Her eyes were locked on the monitor ahead, where her name was displayed in bold beneath the title of the primetime interview. Claire Westwood breaks her silence. Beside her, Julia sat quietly, fingers laced over her lap, calm on the outside but pulsing with fire underneath. Liam was home, guarded by security and a trusted friend. For the first time in days, the house was empty, and so were their excuses. It was time. The host stepped onto the set, all charm and smiles, but Claire had chosen him carefully. He was respected, seasoned, known for cutting through gossip to find the core. If they were going to tell their truth, it had to be here. It had to be now. 3, 2, 1, the director called out. Cameras rolled. Tonight, the host began, we sit down with Claire Westwood, Millionaire CEO, mother, and now, at the center of one of the most talked-about media storms in recent history. She's joined by Julia Monroe, the woman the tabloids can't stop speculating about. But tonight, there are no rumors. Only facts. Claire didn't blink. She leaned forward. Then let's start with one. I'm not ashamed of the woman I love. And just like that, the interview ignited. Claire spoke with clarity and control, walking through the beginning of it all. The decision to retreat from her public life, her desire to protect Liam, the choice to hide her identity to find something real. She admitted every lie, every misstep. But when she spoke about Julia, her voice softened, raw and unwavering. I fell in love with someone who wasn't impressed by my net worth, but by how I read bedtime stories to my son. She didn't know my world, but she knew my heart. Julia spoke next, eyes clear. I was desperate for work when I met Claire. That's true. But I stayed long after I could have left. I didn't fall for a CEO. I fell for the mother who tucked in her son every night like he was her entire world. I stayed for them, not for anything I could gain. The host asked about the investigation, the kiss, the video. Claire didn't flinch. Yes, we kissed in my home. No, it wasn't coercive. No, it wasn't inappropriate. If anything, I waited too long to admit what I felt. And the boy? The host asked. What does Liam think of all this? Julia smiled, warmth blooming in her voice. He asked me yesterday if I was going to be his forever person. Claire's eyes burned, and she reached for Julia's hand on camera, unashamed. The interview aired live. No editing. No filters. Just truth. And the world watched. The reaction wasn't immediate. It came in waves. First shock. Then opinion pieces. Then commentary. Some people called it brave. Some called it foolish. But the most important responses came from the ones Claire never expected. Her board sent a statement of support. Investors backed her. Employees, once silent, began sending messages. Thank you for showing up with honesty. Thank you for reminding us that leaders are still human. But Miranda wasn't finished. Claire received a final message that night. No threats. No venom. Just a forwarded email chain between Miranda and a journalist. One that proved Miranda had orchestrated the leaked footage, the article about Liam, and worse, that she had offered money to a staff member in Claire's house to plant a recording device in Liam's room. Claire's hands shook as she showed it to Julia. She crossed a line, Claire whispered. She crossed every line, Julia said. We end her.
Now.
The next morning, Claire's legal team filed a formal complaint with the authorities, not just civil, but criminal. They had evidence now. Surveillance, witness testimony, digital trails. The case built fast, with Claire's lawyers moving at the speed of war. When the news broke that Miranda Caldwell was under investigation for child endangerment, harassment, and conspiracy to defame, it was no longer Claire's name in the headlines. It was hers. Claire didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The truth had finally won. 2 weeks later, the world calmed. Slowly, quietly, the news cycle shifted.
People moved on.
But Claire and Julia didn't. They moved forward. Claire reinstated Julia not as a nanny, but as a co-founder of a new foundation, one dedicated to single mothers and women rebuilding their lives after trauma. She gave Julia an office, a title, and full freedom. Not because I love you, Claire said. Because you earned it. Liam adjusted with ease. He called Julia his bonus mom now. He built Lego castles with 2 queens instead of a king and queen. And one night, as the 3 of them sat on the porch watching the sky turn dark, Liam sleepily curled into Julia's lap and said, "Can we stay like this forever?" Claire looked at Julia. Julia looked at Claire. And Claire said, without hesitation, "Forever starts now." But they didn't know. Something else was coming. One final twist. It would begin with a phone call from the hospital, and end with a decision that would test the meaning of love all over again. It was 2:06 a.m. when the phone rang. The house was quiet, wrapped in the soft hush of night. Claire stirred first, instinct sharper than sleep, reaching for the device on the nightstand before the second ring. Julia blinked awake beside her, sitting up slowly as Claire pressed the phone to her ear. "Hello." Claire's voice was groggy but alert. On the other end, a woman's voice, calm but urgent. "Ms. Westwood, this is Dr. Yara from Portland General Hospital. We're calling about your mother-in-law, Mrs. Carol Monroe." Claire sat upright, heart instantly seizing. What happened? Julia was fully awake now, her hand instinctively gripping Claire's forearm. "She collapsed at home," the doctor continued. "Her breathing was shallow, and she lost consciousness. She's stable now, but we need someone here. You're listed as the emergency contact." The daughter's phone was off. Claire didn't wait. She was already moving. "We're on our way." They dressed in silence, urgency buzzing under their skin. Julia's hands trembled as she buttoned her jeans. "It's bad," she said softly, like she already knew. Claire kissed her temple. "We'll get there. I've got you." The ride to the hospital was drenched in rain and silence. Julia stared out the window, chewing the inside of her cheek. Claire drove like a woman possessed, focused and fast. When they reached the ER entrance, Julia barely let the car stop before bolting out. Claire followed. Carol Monroe was in room 217, unconscious,
Pale.
breathing through an oxygen mask, her chest rising and falling too slowly. The doctor explained it was a pulmonary embolism, a clot. "We caught it just in time," she said. "But her heart's weak. She's going to need a lot of care. Supervision. Possibly round the clock." Julia stood at her mother's bedside, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "She doesn't have anyone else," she whispered. "Just me." Claire stood behind her, quietly absorbing the weight in her voice. She knew what Julia wasn't saying. That night, they didn't return home. Claire booked a private recovery suite at the hospital and stayed with Julia, curled on a too-small couch, watching her sleep beside her mother's bed. 2 days later, the doctor called Julia into the hallway. Claire followed. The doctor's face was neutral, professional, but her tone was gentler than before. "We've reviewed her scans. There's more than we thought. Microclots in the lungs. Scar tissue around the heart. We're looking at long-term care. Maybe permanent. She'll need someone full-time. And soon." Julia nodded, slowly, trying to stay composed. "I'll figure it out." Claire touched her arm. "We'll figure it out." But Julia didn't answer. The next morning, Back at home, the tension settled in like fog. They barely spoke over breakfast. Liam noticed the shift and clung to Julia more than usual. When he asked if Grandma Carol was going to die, Julia's voice cracked. "I don't know, baby. I hope not." That night, after Liam was asleep, Claire found Julia on the back porch, sitting in the rain without flinching. Her hair was soaked, her face unreadable. Claire stepped into the downpour, kneeling beside her. "Talk to me." Julia didn't look at her. She has no one else. No savings. No insurance. No plan.
I'm all she has.
If she goes into full-time care, I have to be there. I have to be the one. Claire's voice was steady. "Okay, then we do that." Julia finally looked at her. "Claire, I don't think I can do both." Claire felt it like a blade. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I can't be in two lives at once. I can't run the foundation, raise Liam, be your partner, and take care of my mom around the clock. It's not fair to any of you." Claire took her hands. "Then we adjust. We shift. You don't walk away from love just because life gets hard." Julia's eyes glistened. "But what if I have to?" Claire's grip tightened.
No.
"You don't get to do that. Not after everything. Not after you fought through hell with me. You don't walk away now." Julia broke then, sobbing into Claire's shoulder. Claire held her, letting the rain soak them both. "You're not doing this alone. If your mom needs full-time care, we'll make it happen. We'll move her in. We'll hire help. I'll restructure everything. You are not choosing between love and loyalty. You're allowed to have both." Julia pulled back, rain and tears streaking her cheeks. "Why would you do that?" Claire smiled through the ache. "Because I love you. Because Liam loves you. And because you deserve a life where you're allowed to receive, not just give." That night, they sat up in bed, soaked in blankets, planning everything. Claire called her legal team to transfer medical guardianship papers. She arranged for a nurse evaluation. She contacted specialists. Within 24 hours, Claire's home had been fitted with equipment and converted into a part-time recovery space. Carol was discharged 2 days later and came home to a house that had moved mountains to receive her. When she saw what Claire had done, she didn't speak, just looked at Julia and whispered, "She really loves you, doesn't she?" Julia nodded, voice tight.
Yeah.
"She really does." And for the first time, Carol smiled. But late that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Julia slipped into the hallway, phone in hand. She scrolled through the latest offer sitting in her inbox, an international organization offering her a fully funded role to lead a new foundation branch in Europe. 6 months. Independent. Prestigious.
Claire didn't know about it yet.
And Julia didn't know what she was going to do. Not yet. But soon, she'd have to choose between a dream she'd never thought possible and a love she never expected to find. Julia stood in the hallway long after the screen had gone dark. Her phone rested heavy in her hand, the email glowing like a portal to another life. The offer was everything she'd ever dreamed of: respect, autonomy, impact, freedom. And yet, as she stared at the silent house around her, her heart warred with her mind. Claire was asleep upstairs, curled beside Liam in the big bed, a book still open on the pillow where she'd been reading to him before he drifted off. Her mother was in the guest wing, breathing easier now, watched by a discreet private nurse Claire had hired without blinking. Everything around Julia was soft and safe and built on a foundation she'd never had before: love. Home. But something inside her whispered, "Don't lose yourself again." The next morning, she didn't say anything. She couldn't. Claire was glowing, busy in the kitchen with Liam, teaching him how to whisk pancake batter. He spilled flour on the floor, and Claire laughed, really laughed unguarded. Julia stood in the doorway and felt her chest twist in quiet panic. How do you choose between the person you've become and the person you love? But she couldn't keep it in forever. That night, after Liam was asleep, after her mother was settled with her favorite music playing softly in the background, Julia found Claire on the porch. The wind was warm, the stars low and full. Claire had a glass of wine in her hand and that rare, quiet look of peace on her face. Julia's heart ached. "I need to tell you something," Julia said. Claire turned slowly. "Okay." Julia sat beside her, folding her legs underneath her. "A few days ago, I got an offer from an international foundation. They want me to lead a 6-month project in Paris. Full autonomy. All expenses. Big platform. It's the kind of thing I never thought would be possible for someone like me." Claire didn't speak right away. She took a sip of wine, then another, her expression unreadable. And, I haven't said yes. Or no. Julia's voice trembled. "Because part of me feels like I'd be betraying everything we built if I left. But another part of me is scared that if I don't go, I'll start to lose myself again. That I'll wake up one day and wonder what else I could have done, who else I could have been." Claire set the wine down, looked at her, really looked. "Do you love me?" Julia blinked.
Yes.
"With everything." "Do you love Liam?" "You know I do." "Then go." Julia froze. "What?" Claire reached for her hand.
Go.
"Take the offer. Take the dream. Become everything you're meant to be. Because if you don't, you'll resent me. And I love you too much to let you shrink in my shadow." Julia's eyes filled. "But what if I lose you?" Claire shook her head. "You won't. This isn't goodbye. This is just space.
Growth. Trust.
I'll be here. We'll be here. And when you come back, it'll be because you chose us again. Not because you were afraid to choose yourself." Julia let the tears fall then, and Claire held her, both of them wrapped in the certainty that love doesn't always mean holding tight. Sometimes it means letting go and believing they'll return stronger. 2 weeks later, Julia stood at the airport, suitcase in hand, her mother waving from a nearby bench, healthy and stable, Claire beside her, hand on Liam's shoulder. Julia knelt, kissed Liam's forehead. "You be good, okay?" "Will you bring me something French?" he asked seriously. She laughed through the ache. "I'll bring you everything French." She stood, turned to Claire. "I don't have the right words for this." Claire kissed her softly, lingering. "Then don't say anything.
Just go.
And come back." Julia nodded, stepped away, turned once more at the gate. Claire was still there, still watching, still hers. 6 months later. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine. Claire stood in the kitchen, apron on, Liam beside her rolling out cookie dough. Carol sat by the window with a book in her lap and a smile on her face. There was peace now, real peace. And then the front door opened. Julia stepped inside, wind in her hair, cheeks flushed from the cold. Her suitcase hit the floor. Claire turned, and every part of her stilled. Julia said nothing. She just walked forward and kissed her. Long, deep.
Certain.
Liam shouted, "She's back," and ran to hug her legs. Julia knelt and scooped him up, laughing. "Miss me? You were gone forever." "Never again," she whispered. "Never again." Claire stepped forward, brushing a tear from Julia's cheek. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Julia nodded. "I found me, but the whole time, I missed us more." Claire pulled her into an embrace that felt like the closing of a perfect circle. They didn't need a wedding, or promises, or headlines. They had love, a family, a second chance, and this time, nothing would come between them again. Not secrets, not fear, not even the dreams that took them apart, because they'd always find their way back. If you enjoyed this content and want to support the channel in a special way, try clicking the thanks button below. It's the one with the heart and $sign icon. With super thanks, you can make a direct contribution to the channel, which helps me keep creating awesome videos for you.